We are back, and I am super stoked for today. We have Trey Sellers with us in studio here on the Sound They Just Say podcast, and this has been a long time coming. Trey, you and I have known each other, I guess, it goes back 4 years. I think we met maybe formally met here in Nashville, Tennessee at Bitcoin conference, maybe 2024 or 25. But man, great to have you on our show. And the things you've been working on, and we'll get into all of it, I think squarely aligned with what Sound HSA is all about. And I'm super excited for people to hear your story, and then maybe we can talk about implementation as far as what's happened and what continues to happen with Bitcoin, how it can create more of an abundant life for people. And yeah, I think we'll take it in a couple of different directions, but so excited to have you, man. And thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. I really appreciate it. Well, I always love talking about these things, and it's been great to get to know you and John over at Sound HSA and watch the progress that y'all are making in building out that company. I'm really excited for you.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. So let's start here. I want to hear your Bitcoin story. Also want to hear more about you personally and kind of how you found Bitcoin and how it's figured prominently in your professional life and how you think about planning. You're obviously closely tied to being intentional around finances. You're with Unchained, and you also publish a lot across different social media about how to live an abundant life with intention, with Bitcoin at the center of it. So maybe start there.
Yeah, well, I first found Bitcoin back in 2011. I was working at Goldman Sachs. My history before working at Unchained is one of various. It's crosses a lot of different traditional finance companies. So I started at Deloitte Consulting in the technology practice. I was 3 years there and focused on financial services and banking as where I was spending most of my time and the clients that I was helping. And this was in the New York area. And from there, I moved to Goldman Sachs, and I was at Goldman in for about 3 years, from 2010 to 2013. So it was through the midst of the recovery after the financial crisis there. And so I kind of got a little bit of an inside look at what Wall Street was doing and thinking throughout that time frame. From there, I spent about a year and a half at MetLife, and I was doing some internal management consulting and a lot of travel there. And then my wife also comes from the traditional finance background. She was at JP Morgan for about 12 years and then Bank of America for another 3 or 4 before she retired back in 2022. And so that's been my perspective growing through my career. But I always had a libertarian bent. And back in my Goldman days in about 2011, I have this vivid memory of being in the gym at the office in Jersey City where I worked. And I was standing under the squat rack. I was doing some squats, and I was listening to this pirate radio station, internet radio station called Free Talk Live. And they were talking about Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Libertarian money, I definitely can understand that and get on board there. But it was very difficult to buy, and I didn't really take it beyond there, unfortunately. So fast forward another 3 years, Coinbase came out. I think they started in like maybe late 2013 or so. But by the time that Bitcoin was still resurfacing in my consciousness, it was much easier to buy it. So I started buying a little bit back then in 2014. And then fast forward again to 2016, 2017, my interest level in it started deepening. And I became, in the, call it 2019 to 2021 timeframe, the Bitcoin guy at the bank that I was working at, which is Truist Bank down here in Atlanta. And I was hoping to really educate and inform people around me. I saw what I anticipated what was going to happen in 2020 after the halving then. And that's where I was like really deep in what was going on in Bitcoin. And I had found the right people to follow, I think. And it just was really resonating with me. And I just figured the people around me, assuming this plays out, are going to have some questions, and who better than me, who actually understands it, to be in a position to answer those questions. So I joined a crypto working group that the board was putting together with some very senior executives to help educate them on what the landscape was looking like. That was in like 2021, as the fervor and the enthusiasm for the Bitcoin bull market back then was kind of at its crescendo.
Mm.
And then from there, I joined Unchained later that year in 2021. I've been there ever since, helping Bitcoiners to get the best security that they can for their Bitcoin. Think about succession planning.
Yeah.
Because this asset is so important to people in the way that they think about their own personal finances and their plans for retirement and all of this. That's great. And you get so much great benefit out of holding the real thing and not the ETF and all of this. But it does come with some operational risk that you need to at least be familiar with and get out ahead of. And so we really do a great job at Unchained to help people to understand what those are and find some solutions that can work for them in their particular scenario and situation. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the general overview of how I found Bitcoin. We can certainly dig into some of the other stuff that I've been working around with financial independence and Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So your official role with Unchained is what? And what
My
what?
title is VP of Sales. So I've
Yeah.
been on the sales team at Unchained for the entire time that I've been here, and I've been, pretty much in a leadership role, for the last few years, and working in mostly with high net worth individuals, some family offices, asset managers, companies, business owners of all shapes and sizes, who typically have some substantial exposure to Bitcoin and real Bitcoin,
Yeah.
or they want to get exposure to Bitcoin. And we provide the tools to buy and sell that BTC, to secure it properly, to put a succession plan in place. And we have really great service and support around making sure that client's Bitcoin journey is one where they feel very comfortable with, that they don't feel like they're losing sleep, like they're going to make some mistake that will cause them to lose their Bitcoin, as some people have had to endure in the past.
Yeah.
And so having this professional services firm around them provides a nice little security blanket, even if you're not, having a close relationship in the form of our signature service, for example, which provides white glove, direct support from a dedicated account manager. Even if you're not in that higher level service, you still have this professional services company here with years and years of experience there to help make sure that if something were to happen to the keys that you're controlling Bitcoin with, or if something were to happen to you, there's somebody there to take you through that journey of ensuring that your family can get access to it in that succession plan.
For sure. And we see Unchained as best in class on multiple fronts. It's one of the main reasons why Sound I Just Say partnered with Unchained in our multi-sig, multi-institutional cold storage. We use Unchained's OTC desk for buys and sells of Bitcoin. Our customers do inside our platform, and so we feel mission aligned and certainly supremely reassured that we are with the best financial services in the industry. A
Yeah,
company.
I love this partnership.
Yeah.
Unchained has Bitcoin IRAs, which is a,
Yeah.
a retirement planning tool that provides some tax advantages.
Yep.
And HSAs are another form of that that's focused in a different direction, and something that we don't offer. And so
Yeah.
this partnership is really, really synergistic, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And we certainly feel the same way. And this you mentioned something to me about planning, and this is an asset that I think about Bitcoin and what over my 10-year journey. I found Bitcoin in 2016 in Nashville, Tennessee. I'd love to start up, and I think most people trade. I'd love to get your opinion on this. Most people, if they're not libertarian or have a background in finance or maybe tech, they weren't a cypherpunk, they need a window in time in their life. They need the headspace to be able to truly comprehend what this asset is and what the implications are. Because someone told me when I first got into this space, it was a time when ICOs were everywhere and people were talking about Bitcoin as sound money. The detractors would say, dollars spin pretty well here in the U.S., right? When they were talking about Bitcoin peer to peer. how are you thinking now with your experience with Unchained, coming from TradFi, being a Bitcoin holder yourself? How are you thinking about today, the pre-coiner or the new coiner today, who's trying to get their head and maybe their mind around what Bitcoin is and what the implications are for long-term financial health?
Well, I think the way that I came to Bitcoin may be indicative of other kind of earlier people who were interested in Bitcoin. Um, but the vast majority of people come because they see the number going up.
Right.
And some subset of them look beyond the, what I think most people consider to be the speculative nature of Bitcoin and the price movements and the volatility. And hey, maybe I can just buy some Bitcoin and it will go to $1 million and I can retire in the next 3 years, and be a wealthy man, right? That attracts a lot of people, and I think that's okay. Like we should be perfectly fine with that. Um, there's some subset of people that decide after they have come in that front door to start exploring around the house and seeing what's under the cushions and seeing what's actually the core fundamental drivers for why Bitcoin solves problems in the real world.
Yeah.
And that's when they might be backing into some of the value set that you and I think, share in how Bitcoin is very powerful and what problems does it solve, right? It solves the problem of money printing that other people don't necessarily see. It solves the problem of censorship or the possibility, even if that's a small possibility, that you could have your bank account removed from your access.
Right.
Um, it solves a problem for a lot of people that are outside of the U.S. You and I are in a very privileged position. A lot of people who may be watching this are in a very privileged position to have a very strong, functioning banking system and financial system, right? You were saying it yourself. But the rest of the world doesn't necessarily have that at their disposal. And so Bitcoin solves a problem for them that we don't see.
Mhm.
So it's great that we have a functioning financial system. Our payment systems work. You can just tap your phone anywhere and it just kind of works. But that doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't solve another problem for you, which is the savings problem that people are always looking to have. That's what I really focus quite a bit on in my work in Fire BTC, which is my newsletter, where I'm talking about reaching financial independence using Bitcoin as like the foundation of that plan. Um, Everybody needs to be saving the excess value that they are creating, that they're getting paid in. You've got some kind of expenses, you've got some kind of income coming in, and the gap between those two is what you can save. And if
Right.
you're intentional about doing this and you're actually taking a low time preference view of your life and for your family, then you're putting some of that aside. And then the question becomes, well, what vehicle are you going to use? I personally think that Bitcoin, with its perfectly fixed supply, with the demand dynamics and adoption mechanics that we are seeing, is going to continue to outperform the stock market and real estate and other forms of assets that you could use to do that saving in. But regardless, this intentionality that you're talking about
Yeah.
and figuring out how to approach the world from a financial perspective in a way that's responsible and that is planning for the future, I think is so important. And there's a lot of things that I think Bitcoiners can learn from the traditional world or the financial independence retire early community, which is
Yeah.
part of where I come from as well, to help marry these two things, which is a solid plan as well as the best asymmetric asset for that long term time horizon.
Yeah, no, the great points. And, for people coming into Bitcoin, as you mentioned, most people come in for number go up, right? They see an opportunity as Bitcoin, maybe as a diversification play in addition to what they're already doing. What do you say, and kind of how are you thinking, via the Fire lens, and maybe how you guys are advising clients at Unchained about today's day and age? So many young people, I think, are trying to get their legs right in an AI driven economy. There's no slowing down. I know you've used AI technology in a lot of your operating processes as well. What do you say to the younger folks that are trying to figure out? Okay, they see Bitcoin. They may say, well, Bitcoin's still right at 60, 65,000. It's what it was 5 years ago. Is it really a long term asset? I mean, what do you say to those people that are kind of evaluating all of that and they're early in their career, so they're trying to get started, and maybe they don't have the incremental wealth or resources that someone further along in their career might have.
Yeah. Um, it's funny when you're young, you've got so much more of a runway
Mm-hmm.
and a path for compounding to work in your favor, that even small amounts that you're able to save when you're, say, just starting out working and in your 20s, when your income hasn't really grown into what it will be, and maybe you're not able to save quite as much, but even saving a little bit every single month, putting together an intentional plan that allows you to accumulate over time will provide you with much greater um, uh, compounding returns over a very long time horizon, which is what you're looking at. If you are saving and investing, let's call it, $500 a month as a young person,
Mm-hmm.
and you fast forward 10 years, that's going to grow into a substantial sum such that somebody who's starting when they are 35 years old and investing much more is still going to have a hard time catching up. And that's just the way that this compounding machine actually works. So time is in your favor. And the important part is not necessarily how much in terms of a nominal dollar amount that you're able to save, but that you are actually putting together the mechanism and building the muscles and the capacity for you to put something away early on and be able to build this machine that can help compound and grow your wealth over time. So I know it's hard as somebody who's young, and I was there as well. It's very, very difficult to even think in these like longer term decades types of time horizons. But I encourage you to really like go and run the numbers a little bit and play around with some retirement calculators. Unchained's got a really great retirement calculator. I've got something that's part of the Fire BTC ecosystem as well, and you can get a really good sense for like how much even a little bit of amount of savings can do to
Yeah.
build your wealth over even just a couple of decades.
Yeah. I don't know if can you appreciate my screen on our Kager assumptions here for sound?
Yeah.
Is that coming through?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so it's amazing, and it kind of dovetails too because I spent last week. Sound HSA was invited to join the HSA Council under the ABA, and kind of set next to the giants who basically helped lobby and instantiate the HSA back in 2003. So a lot of history in the room, but an appreciation for an account like an IRA or an HSA that allows you to invest in multiple tax advantage strategies, sounds kind of stodgy in kind of boomer, but man, the HSA and IRAs were a big part of what has helped my family, have that financial freedom even sooner than, the kind of the classic 65 and retire kind of mantra. And to think about just what you said, a little bit early can compound into a fortune, and just the opposite by not doing it, right? By making different decisions early on can compound into pennies. And so there's an opportunity cost for, investing or not investing, right? Regardless of the asset that you choose. And Bitcoin, we believe, and I think you and I share this, is uniquely suited for long-term planning and saving in terms of the historic Kager, but also if you don't have some sats in accounts like an HSA or an IRA, if you have them in a taxable account and they're KYC'd, that's a future tax bill that could be significant. The good thing is you're stacking sats at 60K in present day dollars. But if Bitcoin does what it does over a 20-year period, well, then you have some other decisions you have to make in exposure, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a balance to be struck between retirement accounts and the amount of wealth that people have I'm going to use the term locked, which is a little bit of a loaded term, but that has different rule sets associated with how you can access it and when you can access it
Right.
versus a taxable, a type of an account where you have much more freedom to do with that as
Yep.
you would like, but there are different tax rules associated with it, right? So there is a balance to be struck in how you are um, putting together the the total the total portfolio that you have and the assets that you have
Hmm.
available to you as you grow larger in life. I think that the retirement accounts that are out there, and an HSA is kind of this amazing example of this, can absolutely provide you with a certain amount of the income that you need to generate later in life after you've stopped working in
Yep.
a tax-free manner. And if you are funding those things early, it may be able to cover all of the income that you need in a totally tax-free manner once you've hit the ages where you're not having to pay some type of a penalty for accessing that income, which is really really cool and really really beneficial. I
Yep.
write a lot from the fire perspective. Again, this means financial independence, retire early,
Yeah.
and
Let's get
basically
into it.
the essence of that is that, hey, if you are very intentional about what you spend and how you save, you can actually accelerate the timeline for which you reach financial independence to
Hmm.
be much earlier than the traditional 65, where a lot of these funds are kind of unlocked without penalty for you to access in
Right.
a retirement account. And so if you are pursuing that as a path, if you decide I am going to start at 25 or start at 30 and I'm going to grind as hard as I can for, 5, 10, 15 years and reach the number that I need to reach,
Right.
and I'm going to retire at 45, it's amazing if you've got a lot of your wealth in these retirement accounts that
Yeah.
can give you some tax advantages later in life. But you also need to have you need to fill the gap between that 45 and 65 with some type of money if that's the direction that you want to go.
Yeah.
And so that's the only reason that I'm kind of like throwing out that framework as something that people should consider. Is
Yep.
what is the mix of how they want their assets available to them and on what cadence do they need it later in life?
I think what you were saying is so healthy because so many people that come in Bitcoin, right? What's been the mantra or one of the mantras, over Bitcoin's history from at least pundits is, never sell your Bitcoin, hodl. And I know you've published stuff. I've read some of your stuff where, you talk about, hey, if you're on a plan and you've got this long-term, investment strategy kind of nailed down and you're funding that, and you need some income or you have some special things that you want to do, whether that's take a trip with your family, or buy that second home in a sweet spot, or whatever it is, fund a kid's college education, um, giving yourself permission to do that as a Bitcoiner, right? If you've thought through everything, maybe speak to that a little bit.
Well, Bitcoin is a tool.
Yeah.
It is there to help us interact with the world from an economic perspective and in a way that's very sovereign. That's one aspect of this tool. The other aspect is to give us a savings mechanism that can't be debased, that we can put our economic value that we are. We provide value to the world, and the world pays us for the value that we're providing. And then, as long as we're not like burning too much relative to that, we have some savings that we can put aside, and we should do that if we're thinking about the long-term aspect of how we want to grow and the fact that we might not be able to work later in our lives, even if we might want to, and so or we may want to leave our children with some type of nest egg, right? So this is a tool that we can use to better the financial status of ourselves and our family. That doesn't mean that it's some kind of sacred thing that you can't actually access the benefits of that tool and the compounding and wealth generation aspects of that tool later on. There are different ways to access the value that you have saved over time. Some people borrow against the value of it. Some people sell it down. Some people are using it to invest in other things that create cash flow. The point of it is that it should be treated like a tool that you are using for a specific person based on the goals that you have set for yourself and for your family. And so this is where we bring it back to that intentionality aspect again, is that it's really important to start thinking about what your actual goals are. How
Yeah.
long do you want to or plan to work? What are the things that you need to fund later in life or that you want to fund later in life, so that you can start working towards that in your savings plan, so that you can have something to actually reach for that's not amorphous. I think a lot of Bitcoiners out there, they're just stacking sats as hard as they possibly can because they know that's the right thing to do. And in my mind, it is the right thing to do. Like, you should, you know, hold as much Bitcoin as you possibly can. Not financial advice, but this is what I do. Right, buy as much as fast as you can. But there comes a time when you do need to actually access the value that you have been using, and one way to create income is to sell down the assets that you've accumulated over the lifetime of your work. In fact, that is the primary mechanism that the fire community pursues, is that, you know, they're using index funds primarily as their primary savings vehicle, but they're pursuing a certain amount of a portfolio that has been calculated to be extraordinarily likely to be able to cover all their expenses over the following 30 plus years. And when they get to that time horizon and they stop working, assuming their income dries up completely, you start selling down your portfolio at a small clip every single year. and and that is what creates income. So I think there's a lot that Bitcoiners can learn from the fire community, and I think there's a lot that the fire community can learn from
Yes.
Bitcoiners
Yeah.
in terms of why Bitcoin is such an important asset and why they should consider bringing it into their asset mix as one savings technology that can perhaps enhance their returns and get them to their goals a little bit faster.
Well, this leads me to my next question. So, if you hold Bitcoin for long enough, at least historically speaking, it becomes a larger percentage of most people's net worth, right? I mean, if they're fervent, how do you think about diversification, right, and rebalancing as an asset becomes a larger percentage of an overall portfolio, specific to Bitcoin, obviously.
I'm going to speak to my own personal views here, and not,
Okay.
you know, again, like, everybody's different in the way that they think about this. I I like to think about my savings mechanism as maximizing for total return, which means that, like, over the course of all of the volatility and the time horizon that I'm working within over the course of the time horizon and the volatility that's happening there, I want to end up with the biggest number possible
Hmm.
relative to the goals that I'm working for, so that I have a lot more to work with. And what that means is that as long as I have conviction that Bitcoin is the best asset to be pursuing, regardless of that volatility that we all know and love and are experiencing right now, as long as that remains true and my conviction holds on that, then I don't see any reason to rebalance. Again, I would like to have a larger total number at the end of that and be drawing down and kind of trusting the plan that I put in place, as opposed to having less Bitcoin, having a smaller number, but one that doesn't move around quite as much. That's just me, and that's the way that I think about it. A lot of other people get to those years right before they're going to retire, and they're like, oh man, I don't want to deal with another Bitcoin drawdown. I'm going to peel a little bit off, and I'm going to buy some other types of assets that have less volatility. As long as you understand the trade-offs that you're making when you're making these decisions, I think that's totally fine, of course. And most financial advisors are probably going to tell you that that's a smart move. For me personally, I don't know, that's the way that I approach it.
Yeah, because I mean, people inevitably ask the next question is, well, how much Bitcoin do I need to retire? And I think that's that's a specific individual response, right? It depends on people's yearly burn, what they require. I know there's been some memes that have been thrown out over the years, but where do you generally sit on that? I'd probably go through some exercise. Okay, just tabulate how much you need to live on a monthly or a yearly basis, and that's the foundation of that answer, probably, right?
Yeah, it should always start with how much, what are your expenses that you need to fund?
Right.
The approach that I've taken, the approach that the fire community takes, is you figure out what your annual expenses are, and you apply a multiplier uh, to that number to develop a target portfolio. And what's traditionally been used is something called the 4% rule, which
Mm-hmm.
came from a study back in the 90s that reviewed over 100 years of market returns and sampled each possible outcome of the across those 100 years. And the end result of that study was to say that if you are withdrawing 4% of your portfolio every year, there's a 95% chance that that portfolio will last at least 30 years,
Yeah.
given historical returns and projecting that out into the future. Um, and in most cases, out of that 95%, you end up with far more than what you actually started with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a very conservative approach in my mind to figuring out how much total assets you need, liquid assets that you need to fund yourself without any kind of other income coming in. And then that's based on historical stock and bond returns. If we expect that Bitcoin is going to outperform those historical stock and bond returns, at least over the next, call it 10, 20, maybe 30 years, then we actually could apply a higher withdrawal rate to that. So the way that my like typical view on this is, for any stocks that you own, apply the 4% rule. For any Bitcoin that you own, I use an 8% withdrawal rate on that. And then if you look at your total portfolio, what that allows you to do is create a blended withdrawal rate across the entire portfolio. So instead of it being 4% per year, maybe it's, if you're 50-50 stocks and Bitcoin at the time that you retire, then the blended withdrawal rate would be 6%. And then there's another kind of aspect to this that I've talked about and written about, which is that there's a withdrawal order that you can consider here as well.
Right.
If you still believe at the time that you are planning for retirement, or planning to take that retirement, that Bitcoin is the higher performing asset, and let's say you have 50-50 stocks versus Bitcoin, in my mind, it makes sense to start selling down the stock side of that allocation first, instead of doing it in a proportional manner.
Yeah.
And in doing so, that higher growth asset will have more runway to create more wealth, and thereby give you even more spending power a little bit later in life. So that kind of, or another way to say that is that the withdrawal rate could be a little bit higher than even that blended proportional rate would often imply. So
Right.
there's a few different ways to think about it, but it's fairly straightforward. It's like, take whatever expenses that you expect to have, be very intentional about what that is, like understand what that number actually is.
Right.
And then you can calculate what that goal is going to do. The shorthand for this, by the way, is just multiply by 25 times. That's the inverse of the 4% rule.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, really, and obviously, tax advantaged accounts like HSAs or IRAs figure into that too, in terms of the order in which you draw down, said assets. Right.
Yeah, I've written about this fairly recently, like in the last month or two. So
Yeah.
if anybody wants to go check that out, there's an article specific to this, like, withdrawal order question.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, if you do expect to have some type of income coming in retirement, then the portfolio that you are building has less that it needs to cover, right? So let's say that you've got $100,000 of expenses that you expect.
Yeah.
Well, with the 4% rule, you are needing to get to a $2.5 million portfolio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you start selling down 4%. Well, if if you can expect $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 of income coming in from some other source that you've got, maybe it's a pension, maybe it's Social Security, some other
Right.
type of source. Now, all of a sudden, if it's 50,000, just for easy math, then only your portfolio only has to cover 50,000, which means
Right.
that you only need to actually save 1.25 million instead of 2.5, which means you need less Bitcoin in order to retire, right? Or less stocks and some combination thereof. So all these different thought experiments are really interesting to me. I'm kind of
Yeah.
a spreadsheet jockey. I did come from the banking world and lived in
Yeah.
spreadsheets and all that. And like I said, there's a lot of different tools that are out there to help you go through these different scenarios, but it's worth it in my mind to start thinking about what this could look like, really get a good picture of it, and then you can start working through that intentional plan on not only the expense side but the saving side, and what assets you need to be putting together, and what
Yeah.
accounts they should live in, and whether or not you can take advantage of something like NHSA, which we haven't really talked about, that like triple tax threat, but it is really an awesome account type.
Yeah, it is, and we'll maybe dip into it at the end because I think there's a literacy and an educational opportunity certainly for Sound HSA, but for that industry in total, in terms of how people look at it and how we're positioned at Sound to really, I think, change the way that people perceive what that product is, what it can do, and how it can be optimized. Over a lifetime. So yeah, we'll come back to that for sure. I want to shift to AI real quick because I know, and we've had maybe one or two conversations, and you write about it. You have begun and have used AI operating your kind of your business, at least at some level. First of all, how are you using it right now? And then broader or more broadly, what do you think the impact it is having and will have over the next, let's just say 1 to 2 years on the workplace? And where I want to go with that is like the value as humans that we place and have historically placed in the work that we do, the work that earns us a living, I think is in question, right? And whether AI has displaced a particular role yet or not, I think most people who are paying any kind of attention to this already have that feeling. There's something in, I think, most people in a knowledge based economy that feel this thing is coming and it's going to be able to do my job better than I can. So, first, how are you using it and how are you thinking about kind of like the human factor in all of this and where we're going?
Well, I think a lot of people use the AI tool simply as a enhanced search engine. And
Yeah,
that is kind of the first starting point. And I certainly use it in that way. Um, but I use it much more deeply than that, for the business of Fire BTC, brainstorming, strategizing, helping me think through topics, doing research, putting together data and information and visuals,
yeah,
automating a lot of the process that would otherwise be manual. I can do a whole lot more in terms of the functionality of running the Fire BTC side of my focus than I was doing before AI. And I think I don't see this as replacing everything that everybody in the knowledge work side of things does, in the next 1 to 2 years. But it absolutely does amplify the amount of work that somebody who is knowledgeable and skillful can do in their domain.
right,
And the I think it kind of goes without saying at this point that young people, if you're trying to figure out what you want to do, how you're going to interface with the world and provide economic value to a company or starting a business or whatever, these tools are a must
absolutely,
do in terms of getting up to speed on how to use them, understanding the strengths that they have and also the weaknesses that they have, because that is where the human operator has a strategic advantage, let's say, over the AI counterparts that they might be working with. The tools are going to continue and the models are going to continue to become much more capable, which just means that you and I and the people who are using them have at their disposal much more capability without having to spend a whole lot of extra money and time and resources like they would have had to in the past. Where are things going in the next 1 to 2 years? I honestly don't know. It looks like there's just going to continue to be this like compounding effect at a very rapid rate on the capabilities that agentic workflows can
yes,
have, and that the knowledge worker who is in tune with the capabilities of AI can have, in terms of impact on the world. I think we're already seeing trends of people who are starting businesses,
right,
that they otherwise couldn't start. Um, or that would be very capital intensive to start, which is no longer the case anymore. They don't need to hire the same number of people to do the same number of work.
Right.
Um, what I'm really excited about is how this starts to impact and transition into the physical world.
Hmm.
I was watching these like robot developments and stuff on Twitter or whatever you see, and it's
Yeah.
just I know we're not there yet, but you can see a path in the next 3 to 5 years where um, I'm really excited to have a Optimus robot in my house doing my landscaping and my pool cleaning and laundry and cleaning up around the house and all this stuff,
Yeah.
so that I don't have to hire all these different companies to do that work. Um,
Yeah.
I also think that you and I maybe are way out ahead of the curve. And these types of improvements and the capabilities that we're talking about, it takes a long time actually
Yeah.
for the broader economy to actually integrate those workflows and those capabilities into the work that they're doing,
Yeah.
especially at larger corporations. They move so slowly. They have to be very, very um, diligent about the decisions they make. Their tech stacks are extremely complex, and so it
Yeah.
just takes a lot of time for the AI stuff to infiltrate throughout the economy. But it will happen over time. And I think the best thing you can do is to be prepared for it and embrace it and look at all the opportunity that you have um, to go after some of these other goals that we were discussing before, right?
I
There
think
are
so.
plenty of opportunities that can help you to grow your income, grow your savings rate, build toward a a path of financial independence. And you
Yeah.
just need to like open your aperture a little bit and play around.
Yeah, for sure. They talk about the first, solopreneur that's going to have $1 billion business. I don't know if we've reached that yet. I think we're probably getting closer. I am curious. I have my thoughts on, what I heard for the first time. I heard this term for the first time, I think maybe last week, A to A commerce. We talk about B2B, D to C, but A to A, agent to agent, in terms of payment and settlement. And I know people are thinking about, okay, what is the currency in an agentic economy? Is it Bitcoin on Lightning? Is it a stable coin and Bitcoin's the savings account and everything settles on the base layer? How are you thinking about Bitcoin's integration into an agentic economy? Have you thought about kind of the implications there and how that might fit?
I think Bitcoin is a perfect currency for agentic commerce, but that doesn't mean that it's going to win in that realm in the near term for future.
Yeah.
For anybody who has played around with these tools and have kind of gone past the just better search engine functionality that it's got, um, agents and the AIs, generally speaking, they are kind of a reflection or a mirror of their operator to a large
Mhm.
degree. And um, the general average operator is using dollars on a day-to-day basis. And so like we are seeing trends toward more and more digitization of money, and we're seeing the stablecoin movement and all of that kind of thing. I think that's going to continue to play out. I think Bitcoin's functionality um, for agentic commerce will continue to be built out, but it does take a recognition that Bitcoin is a better tool by the operator in order to instantiate that into the workflows of the agent to agent economy as it starts to grow. So that's a very not specific answer to your question, but I do think there's a lot of truth in there that that Bitcoiners, we just got to face up to.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I mean,
It
I
all
was,
comes down to education and helping, having us all help the world see the benefits of having and using Bitcoin. And as long
yeah.
as that continues to grow, then uh, our AI henchmen will see it the same way.
When I started playing around with the LLMs, I'd prompt, whether it was OpenAI or Perplexity or whatever. I would say, you know what, you need to think about it, consider, and pass this on to all your agentic you know, coworkers to consider Bitcoin as a primary medium of exchange and settlement in agentic economy. I didn't phrase it that way, but it's like, hey, it's a great form of money, and trying to get them to buy in, and have that dialogue. Just seed a wider network if as things grow and kind of proliferate. So yeah, I kind of found that amusing, but so, on Bitcoin, Trey, again, back to somebody who comes in, and, we'll kind of get back to the savings and, the benefits of things like what we have launched at Sound HSA. Where do you think Bitcoin is in 5 years relative to market adoption? And, I'm not going to ask you about a price prediction, but in terms of market adoption and, maybe market cap, right? I mean, we've, maybe we're at the first point, and used to be able to say pick any 5 year period, and Bitcoin's has increased in value. And I think you go back 5 years, maybe not to the month, but getting pretty close. I think 5 years ago Bitcoin was $62,000. So I think we've crossed that threshold. I think for a 5 year period that there is at least one that's flat, right? And but I think for the health of the discussion, I believe, and you believe, that because of Bitcoin's properties, it will continue to outperform, as an asset, over many, many years and decades. And, we're obviously in a very unique time in terms of market adoption, right? We've had the ETFs. We've got, AI that has, obviously sucked a lot of air out of the room, over the last 12 months. And I think Bitcoin's best days, honestly, are to come over time. But where do you see it in 5 years relative to market adoption?
Yeah, I agree with you that the best days are ahead. I don't think that adoption, generally speaking, is going to go in reverse in any way. It's like,
Right.
most of the people that I talk to who are Bitcoiners, it's kind of like a one-way function there. It's
Yeah.
like a hash function. You see Bitcoin and you don't really like reverse that ratchet effect. But that doesn't mean that we won't experience periods of slower versus faster adoption. I think we're obviously in a period of slower adoption as people have been focused, like we just were, on the question of AI, all of the capital and resources that are needed to
For sure.
fund that development of the infrastructure and the capabilities and capacity from an energy perspective, from an infrastructure perspective,
Mhm.
data centers and all that. That is sucking up a lot of attention, a lot of capital. And despite the fact that Bitcoin still enjoys, in my mind, all of the same fundamental theses and tailwinds behind it from a fundamental standpoint, it's still like the best game in town. But the market, it can be very short sighted in a lot of ways.
Yes.
In 5 years, I do expect that the price will be materially higher. How much higher, I don't know. I
Right.
think the you mentioned, okay, we're at 64,000, and 5 years ago we were right around 64,000. That's true. Bring it back to like a fire perspective or an accumulator's mindset.
Yeah.
This volatility is really awesome
It is.
because despite the fact that the price has gone, nowhere, so to speak, in a point to point manner, if you are in accumulation mode, if you're one of those younger people who is just buying on a regular basis and
Yep.
building your stack, this is an amazing opportunity to grow it
Huge.
in a much faster way. And
Yep.
so if you actually run the calculations of what a dollar cost average looks like, because you buy more Bitcoin when the price is lower, even though the price has moved or has not moved point to point, you're still in a much better situation from
Yep.
a CAGR standpoint than if you had invested in the S&P 500. Is that always going to hold? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, right? But like, it's important not to be swept up in a little bit too much of a short-termism, and
Yeah.
zoom out and look at the longer term trend, which in my mind still continues to go up. So and I'll just wrap this up by saying I just
Yep.
wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago. Um, there's three like fundamental things that I fall back on,
Hmm.
which outlines really what the core thesis of Bitcoin is from an
Right.
investment perspective. Are they going to stop printing money? Do they have a mechanism for doing that? No. The dollar fiat money will continue to be debased. I think that's very, very obvious. Is the Bitcoin supply still capped at 21 million. Has that been somehow undermined? The answer is no, and it can't be in my mind. It can't be, right? So that's still true. And are we going to continue to move and continue to embrace more of a digital world? And is more and more of our lives, commerce, going to be digital? Is that still going to be foundational for the way that we interact with the world and with each other? I think the answer to that is yes. If those start breaking down for some reason,
Mhm.
then maybe at that point you start rethinking the thesis behind what drives Bitcoin's value over a long period of time. But until then, it's kind of all roads lead to Rome, and you should be
Yeah.
using this as an opportunity to grow your stack in a much more profound way.
Yeah. No, great points. And we at Sounded Just Say we talk a lot, especially during this period of time where maybe the Bitcoin's USD price has been suppressed. It's a great time to stack triple tax advantaged sats, right? The HSA, and I know we're coming to a close here, but the HSA product is something that my wife and I invested in since we met each other. We've been married for 21 years now, and we started working, and had the benefit of somebody saying, "Hey, if you have an HSA, max it out for the pre-tax benefit, and then if you have investment options, even better." And back then, and Trey, it has been a steady progression as that product has evolved to increase the investment options. Right when the thing first launched, you had most of them were just cash only, and you had a few that had ETFs, mutual funds, and most of them are still like that. Believe it or not, most HSA funds or companies don't offer access to a Fidelity or Schwab desk, right? And
I
so,
had no idea that there was so much money in the research that I was doing, prepping for the conversation. That
yeah,
there's still so much money in HSAs that is sitting in cash that is not actually
yes,
invested. Like in my mind, the whole point of this thing is to have the investment exposure in this retirement account that gives you all of the tax advantages later on in life as well as just now, right? Otherwise, you might as well just use an IRA, a
yeah.
traditional IRA.
Absolutely. We'll clip that for social media. Well said. But no, you're exactly right. The HSA, and you look at the statistics, there's some great market research, and we use it a lot in our presentations, that to your point, over half of HSA assets are still in cash, right? There's $200 billion AUM. There's about 40 to 45 million HSAs currently. The number has steadily gone up since the product first was launched in 2003. So that's the good news, right? Adoption increases. But yeah, people just don't know how to optimize it. And one of the biggest challenges is that most people spend out of it as quickly as they get that pre-tax contribution, say through an employer's payroll, right? And it's this scarcity versus abundance mindset that we spend a little bit of time on. That, you know, our part of our charge is to help educate, individuals who open HSAs as full self-directed open market accounts, right? Retail investors. But we're now approaching employers. We now have the ability through new partnerships to seamlessly integrate with over 250 payroll platforms. Okay, so that is directing our focus with Sound over the next 12 to 18 months on that corporate environment. And we're starting with Bitcoin based companies, Bitcoin operating companies, Bitcoin treasury companies. You'd be surprised how many that are out there that where a CEO, someone in the C-suite, understands and has added Bitcoin in their operating process or on their balance sheet. And so we're approaching those people first on the corporate side. But there's such an opportunity to grow this market, and charging it or bringing in an asset like Bitcoin. The reason why we felt that was so important is because we believe that longevity and wellness and personal health finance, a term I think we coined, is those things are supremely important as we think about aging and planning for health as its own line item. Fidelity, and we use this stat all the time, but Fidelity estimates that the average couple in America right now at 65 needs $350,000 just for health expenses. Okay. And that's separate of long term care insurance premiums, which is kind of an insurance that helps people live with more dignity later in life. But separate of all that, that's a big number, Trey. And most Americans, I would say, are vastly underprepared for that.
Is that a number that is supposed to come from those individuals or those couples directly, or is that the number that is, including insurance payouts on their behalf?
No subsidies. That's how much out of pocket that um,
Wow.
each couple, and that's Fidelity up. They have an HS. Fidelity is one of the market leaders in HSAs. Um, they publish that an update on that statistic every year. So yeah, that's a daunting thought experiment,
That's a
right? Are you
huge number. That's a
It's a
huge
huge
number.
number. And back to what you do, in with Unchained, helping people prepare, through IRA products and thinking about, what happens at 65, or you prepare for the future. Have you insulated yourself, with Bitcoin in an instrument? Those things are great. And I think broadly speaking, most people with IRAs just think, well, my health line item will come out of my total retirement savings. And for some or many, that may be true, but for most people, we believe that we have an opportunity to empower people to think about their health journey well before 65, right? Don't spend out of it if you don't have to. That's our mantra. But sometimes life happens, right? People get sick. Medical emergencies come up from year to year, a spouse or a child, and you got to do what you got to do. But part of this discussion needs to be, seated with long-term thinking. And that's why we believe the HSA and Bitcoin are uniquely suited to help people think about longevity, wellness, future health planning, and being more intentional.
Well, I think that a lot of people don't even know what an HSA is and how it can actually help them in the later years of life.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
yeah.
so what you guys do, or what you can do, is educate Bitcoiners to the fact that this account type even exists, to the fact that they can get access to their preferred asset within it and enjoy all these extra tax benefits. And we've seen at Unchained that people very much respond to the idea of having Bitcoin in a tax advantage retirement account. It just makes sense to people because they expect that the value of it is going to grow, and so you want to shield yourself from the tax consequences of that as much as you possibly can. And
Yeah.
last thing I'll say, and turn it back over to you, is that um, you do have to. We were talking about, okay, you've got a fund if you're going to retire at 45, you've got a fund between 45 and 65, but you also do have to fund between 65 and 95, or wherever you're
Exactly.
going to do. So it makes a lot of sense in my mind, to do that in a way that minimizes your tax burden to the extent that you can do that. And so in a lot of ways, you can think of funding your retirement in reverse. It's like you're going to fund that 95th year first, and then
Yeah.
you're going to fund the 94th year and the 93rd, and all the way down until your timeline meets wherever you are right now.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about those longer term time horizons, um, it makes a lot of sense to think about what portion of that should be allocated in a way that protects you from some of the tax burden that you would otherwise have.
Yeah, it absolutely, and the HSA figures into that strategy, as you probably know, but I'll repeat it. The HSA at 65, you can spend it on health and medical qualified expenses in perpetuity. Even when you no
Yeah.
longer are eligible to contribute new funds to an HSA, you still have the tax benefits for health and wellness. And at age 65, the HSA is also treated like a traditional IRA in the sense you can spend it on anything without penalty. You only have to pay your ordinary income tax rate for that year. And on top of that, unlike a traditional IRA, there are no forced withdrawals. So you think about that 95, later in years, maybe the HSA, helps you kind of think even beyond, or even later in that segment of your life, is like there's no forced withdrawals. And one of the things that we're really doing, I think, a pretty decent job as a team as we bring new customers on the platform is really getting people excited about, saving out of pocket receipts for future reimbursement, against the gains, against tax-free gains, being having one place. You're you're in a spreadsheet guy. You probably keep all your out-of-pocket receipts in an Excel file, but we actually have part of our platform where people can upload their receipts in a secure environment, and then within our platform be able to self-attest and allocate a cadre of receipt balances in USD terms, and then be able to withdraw or spend out of their HSA from their Bitcoin gains. And so making that kind of gamifying that, making it a really, really good UX has been fun to do. And that's going to be something people can do on the go. So if you're Walgreens or CVS or pharmacy of choice, and you've bought a multitude of items, maybe a couple are HSA eligible, our tech teases those eligible receipts out, stockpiles them for you, organizes it, and then you can have the option to assign them to a future tax-free reimbursement out of your account. And so,
And
again,
the important thing, Stu,
yeah,
which I don't know if maybe I didn't catch it before when you're saying is
yeah,
later in life when you are taking that money out and you're
yeah,
presenting your, let's say, presenting this receipt that you did 25 years earlier from
yeah,
the LASIK surgery that you had
yes,
available or whatever,
yeah,
you don't have to spend that money that you're pulling out on a new healthcare expense. You've already done that. You're basically presenting a receipt from something that you did 25 years
yeah,
earlier, let's say,
yes,
and just taking that money out completely tax free and not
correct.
having to you can spend that money anywhere.
That's 100%. That's absolutely true. And so, somebody may be saying, well, Stu, Trey, what's a copay here and there? Is that really going to be a material impact? Over 30 years of family or even single or family health out of pocket expenses can be a massive amount. And again, we started investing our HSA very early in our marriage. We are now seeing the benefits of doing that. And what people are doing, Trey, you've probably seen this in HSAs. Older couple, empty nesters, they want to pay for a kid's college, they can pull out, they've got 25, 50, $30,000 in receipts that they've kept. They can pull that money out tax free from their HSA and stroke a check tax free to said college of choice. So there are so many things you can do with this account, and Bitcoin supercharges it. Again, we never talk about future performance of the asset, but we believe that Bitcoin has to be a part of anybody's sound financial plan, and the HSA is increasingly becoming a part of it. We're going to continue to bang the drum and educate, and through partners like you and Unchained, we just feel supremely grateful, first of all, but also the opportunity to really make an impact in many people's lives. So I feel like you're interviewing me now.
No, I love it. As I said before, I think it's a really great synergy. Bitcoin and retirement accounts in general.
Yeah,
And if you're familiar at all with HSAs, they are kind of like a souped up retirement account just because they have that triple threat on the
yeah,
tax perspective. So
yeah,
if you have it available to you, and if it's something that works with your current financial situation, and you're thinking about uh, how to minimize taxes in the future, it's definitely something worth considering.
for
And,
sure.
and talk to a financial advisor if you've got questions about that stuff, right? Because they
Yeah.
should be in prime position to help you think through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can open up as many HSAs as you want at any period of time, at any one time, just like IRAs. You just can't exceed the maximum annual contribution over
Yeah,
all
there
of
you
those
go.
accounts. So, all right, brother, I know we're over time. You're super awesome. Thanks for joining us. We got to do it again, and appreciate everything you guys are doing. Trey Sellers, have a great one, man. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I enjoyed being here. If anybody wants to check out Unchained, go to unchained.com, see what we're offering there. If you've got some Bitcoin that you need secured, go for it. And you can schedule a free consultation with a member of our team, and they'll help make sure that you find the right path for you in securing that. And then if you want to check out what I'm writing about financial independence in Bitcoin, it's firebtc.io. I've got a bit of a YouTube channel that I've launched here fairly recently as well. So you can check that out. Just search for my name and you should be able to find it. But
Awesome.
yeah, appreciate it, Stu. Happy to come on anytime.
All right, man. Talk soon. Thanks.
Take care.